Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Over It podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Suzanne Kohlberg, joined as usual by the amazing
Kristan Kershaw.
I wish this was video as well. I think we're going to put it on YouTube so you can see the
The
hand actions.
The actions.
It's half the fun. And today's topic is one of my favorites and least favorites simultaneously. We're going to be talking about failure. So, Kristan, what's your relationship with failure?
Well, that's an interesting one. I definitely have, I don't know if I fully call myself type A personality, like the drive and whatever else, but there's definitely a history of need to do this and need to do it well. And if I don't, that's whether I label it as failure or not. I think we often skirt around failure with other words and phrases, but the ultimate feeling is the same. And the way that we, at the end of it, I didn't do okay. One big thing that's certainly been part of my journey to where I'm at now is actually I failed my kids because I didn't have the right minerals. I didn't have the right nutrients, and the mother's guilt on all sorts of things, not just that we can do and have and live in, is huge. So when my youngest was very unwell as a baby, and I realized that it was in part and in large part really because I didn't have the nutrients in me to give her when I was pregnant. And here's me thinking I've got this healthy baby and healthy pregnancy and all the rest of it. But ultimately she was really unwell, and that was because she was mineral out of balance. Mineral dysregulation was a big part of her. But as soon as I started to reframe that as this is part of the journey, and then now that I know I didn't do it intentionally, nothing that I had done intentionally was, I'm going to deprive myself of nutrients so that my children are unwell. No, I had to reframe it, and it took time. Like, it's not suddenly you go, right, snap my fingers and now I'm done and I'm over feeling like a parental failure. But I think most of us who are parents, probably hazard a guess to say all of us really, at some point or another, have felt like a complete and utter failure by our kids. But as soon as I started to find ways to reframe it, that actually now I know better, I do better, and find ways, well, now that I know that she's out of balance from a minerals point of view, what can I do to help that? And that became our next leg of the journey. I didn't then regret and pay out my own self, my past self, for the failures. I grew from that. And what can I learn from this became my mantra. What can I learn from this experience when I felt like I'd failed or not done well on something? So that's kind of a snippet of my failure. I'm very curious to hear more on yours, or any questions you've got therein too.
There's two things that come up. The first is there's three. First off, thank you for a very, vulnerable share there. Secondly, I love how you said I failed to provide adequate minerals. I'm paraphrasing here, but it's like, but did you really fail? Because as a result of that, what do you do now?
Exactly. And how many thousands of people, it's not just us, like our health is completely turned around. And I've changed a multi-generational health issue that wasn't known to be a change. So my grandkids, even if my kids may still have some sort of, because you don't change these things overnight, they can have very different health outcomes to what I had as equivalent ages. But at the same time, maybe, we won't be able to fix, if you call it that, their issues. But imagine how much healthier their bodies are for when they have kids.
And also, sorry to interrupt, but the multi-generation, not just going forward, but backward, because I know you've spoken about your mum and stepdad and how they've been using the protocols as well. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's the thing too, because when we're really stuck in a failure mindset, we can think it's too late now. Like I've already had my children, it's too late now. Or I'm this age, it's too late now. And for anyone listening, like I would hazard a guess as well. We all have thoughts of coulda, shoulda, woulda, it's too late now. But, it's never too late. In any moment, you can start again. So that was that. And then the other thing that it's going to be random and you're going to be like, what? But I'd love to hear how you define a type A personality, because I was on a group coaching thing the other day as a participant, and somebody said that. And somebody else put their hand up and said, look, I've heard this term all the time, but what does it actually mean? Which I thought was fascinating. So, sidetrack briefly. It's our podcast. We can do what we want. How would you define type A personality?
Well, it's interesting because as I said it, I'm like, I should really, before I go saying that, go look up the definition to see that I meet all of it. But in the training that I do, I see a lot of people who define as, and somewhere a long time ago, I didn't look up more on it. It's been a while since I've looked. It's often those who are very driven towards, right, I'm going to achieve this. I'm going to tick this off my list. It's kind of that driven must be, and I should caveat it really, because I've not been the one that was like, I must supersede everybody in school and I must supersede. I was really happy to just do my best in school, do my best at university, and, try and achieve work towards higher grades, or always for me, it's been understanding properly whatever I was learning, not necessarily that the grade reflected it. My exams, I was well known to not be great at exams, even though, so my husband would cram and could ace an exam, and we'd be doing the same course. And then I would know all the assignments back to front, understand the concepts, be able to verbatim explain slides that we'd seen, and probably still could for 20 plus years ago qualifications, but I didn't do great on exams. So, it's a lot of, I think when I said that, it was the driven to do well, to, if I'm going to do something, do it properly type thing. I don't half-heartedly do anything that I do at all. There's a few things in and around that. That's how I would define my take on the type A thing. It may not be the official definition.
No, I loved it. And I think sometimes we use terms without really exploring what they mean. And other people have very definitions, which, I'm the wordsmith. And the thing is, for me, and once again, I don't know the official definition, is type A is high achieving. So as soon as I hear type A, I zone out. I'm like, I'm not high achieving. And then other people look at me and laugh and go, what do you mean? And it's kind of like our self-concept of how we think of ourselves. Like, to me, high achieving, the image that comes to mind is like corporate, climbing the ladder, 6-figure plus income, like, high achievers. And it's like, oh, and that's why I asked to define, because sometimes we count ourselves out when we're listening to a podcast, we're reading something, we're like, oh, that's not us. And it's like, because in what way? And I think the way you defined it, if I was paraphrased, and is more kind of like perfectionistic, as in like set high standards for self, but not necessarily the high achieving, because who gets to define the achievement too? Like, I think you and I were having a discussion about honors a while back.
I was just thinking about honors. That's for both of us. We have very similar.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, I didn't get first class honors, so I'm not high achieving. And it's like, oh, discounting the thesis and the time that goes into writing that. And actually, technically, I've done 2 books because the thesis is 1. Didn't even think about that. But anywho, if you want to read that one, it's a bit dry.
I've got a fun story about my thesis. Do you want to hear that? I don't know if you actually are aware of this. So I did honors as well. My undergraduate was in biology and the animal science type area and ecology. And then postgraduate, I went into dingo management of all things. So more the ecology side of things. And the project that I did was around aging dingoes using their teeth. So for anyone listening who doesn't know what a dingo is, it's an Australian wild dog. They're not actually a dog. They're not a wolf either, but they're their own thing by themselves. They're not the same as a domestic dog, but they can interbreed with them. Anyway, it was actually to do with management from a Department of Natural Resources type thing, trying to manage populations of wild dogs that breed or have dingoes bred into them, trying to understand the population dynamics through their teeth. So of all things, I did all sorts to do with that, but it's a very niched area. It's very specific to the organization that I collaborated with the university. Anyway, I had a supervisor who all through school didn't like me. And my husband and I would have remarkably similar assignments, or written in very similar ways. I don't know how that possibly happened with the wordsmith and the one who didn't like assignments, but, I'll let anyone make a guess as to why they might have been similar. And someone else would get really high grades and I would be marked down in some way for nothing. Anyway, when that went into the honor side of things, I kept getting reprimanded for things that were outside of my control and marked down for it as well. So sample size too small. It's like I'm literally using dingo skulls from the Australian National Library, National University special collection. I've gone to Canberra to, like I've made a big effort. You can't go and get these things. It's a very specialized area, but he kept marking me down. Anyway, I kept pushing up against this guy, and everyone else was raving about what I was doing and the work, and it was used actually for a long time afterwards. How many honours students actually know that their work gets used out in the field or whatever afterwards? It doesn't actually always happen. Anyway, he marked me down so much that I got a 2B in honours, not even 2A, missing out on the first class.
No, I got 2A. Oh,
it was
2B.
by 0.9 of a mark or something like that, 0.9% or 0.9 of a mark, and he would not budge. And he had yet again marked me down for the same stuff, which you're not meant to be able to mark down more than once on the same thing. So 6 months worth of arguing with the university using the guild or whatever, the student guild, and I won. They agreed with me that he had unfairly marked me, and I actually was given a new review, and I wasn't too far off first class in the end. And I'm like, see, I'm proud of that, because I'm like, I fought against him. Then the little amusement at the end of all that, finally I win and all of this, and then the dude retired like a year later.
No way.
Are you kidding me? And my husband by that stage was actually working at the university. So when he left the university, they gave him the wooden thing that had been on the directory of where people are. And on the back of that was the supervisor's name. So I've got my husband's name etched in wood. And then on the back is that supervisor who marked me down for honours. So I will forever have his name on that until we decide to let go of that item. But it's hilarious. We joke about it every time. But that for me, so your experience with honours is feeling that level of failure because of that, whereas mine, because I ended up fighting for it the way I had to in the end, to either be 2B or 2A and not far off to first class. Isn't it amazing how it changes so much? I didn't go to my graduation. I was so angry with the whole thing. I never went to my honours graduation for that.
Yeah,
so
no, well, I fought mine and I would have won. Reminds me of the song, I fought the law, but the law won. Anyway, they said they would let it through, but I'd have to wait 6 months to graduate. And I was like, what does it matter? Because what happened with mine is the person who was supposed to mark it fell through. So my own supervisor had to mark it. And she literally told me, she's like, I can't give you first class honours because I'm your supervisor. And that looks like nepotism or whatever the word is.
Yeah.
So I was like, I busted my ass on this. Anyway, mine was, your dingo one, I laughed. It was medication compliance in patients 65 plus post-hospital discharge. Because what's fascinating is how often people's medication gets changed in hospital, or they're given another brand and then go home and take a generic and end up inadvertently double dosing and causing all sorts of hospital things for readmittance. And so, there we go. So, but the thing is too, like when it's failure or what is failure, like for me, that example never led to anything in particular. But another example we were talking about before we hit record, so I'll share it with the listeners now. In 2017, basically, I don't know, some people may have heard this story before, but I call myself the accidental entrepreneur because I never actually started out to have my own business. I'm much more happy being backstage person or behind the scenes for someone else. And that was the case. And I was training with this person. I was basically their executive assistant. I did all the bits and bobs, and they were training me in their coaching method as well to do coaching on their behalf. And to cut a very long story short, they ended up firing me unexpectedly, very painfully. And I was literally had gone away from home. I'd missed my daughter's birthday to go to this thing for them. And as I'm waiting for them to arrive and I can't log into anything, nothing's working. So I'm ringing them saying, I think we've been hacked. Like, I was worried. And they're like, I'll talk to you when I get there. And then when I get there, they didn't come to the room. They called me. So it was really weird. And they were like, I'm letting you go. And anyway, long story. So as I'm sitting on the hotel room crying for missing my kid's birthday and not having a job and whatever, my own health coach, who I'd done my own journey with and hired to help me with my weight mindset and everything, sent me a message and said, hey, I'm doing a training. Would you like to learn this methodology? And I was like, oh, So it was so funny. It literally on that night, the message comes in. So there's some providence or something there. And anyway, the reason I bring this up as a thing of failure is because I felt defeated. I'd spent years with this person, a lot of money, a lot of energy, everything to just be locked out. Like, I've changed all the passwords, your access is revoked. And it's like, wow, when you build something, and you and I have talked about this before, personally, I have some trust issues. We can see why. And then you lose it all.
Yeah.
And yeah, so the next year in 2018, I'd started my business. I was toddling along. I think that's the year you and I met. And anyway, I had always wanted to write a book, like always. And this particular person was like, it's not the right time. You need a bigger audience, rah, rah, rah. They weren't in my life anymore. So I thought, like, why not give it a go? My book is now published. Shameless plug. It's called The Beginning is Shit. If anyone wants to look it up, I'd say most retailers have it, but search by Suzanne Kohlberg, because if you look up the title, it's hard to find. Whole other story. Anywho, started writing the book. It's a memoir, so it's about my life. When I got to that section, like the section where I was fired, I stopped. It was at that time, it was fresh, it was new, it was huge, it was a big, like, milestone moment. And I didn't know how to articulate it. I didn't want to take away from story. I didn't want to segue. Like, I was like, eh. So I like parked the book for nearly 3 years. And then when I picked it back up, which was, funnily enough, for everyone listening, at a retreat that Kristan was at in person. So it was supposed to be about something else entirely. And I was like, hey, I'm writing my book. And they're like, okay, cool. Like, you do you. And that moment, like when I came to revisit it with couple more years of perspective, it was like, oh, and it's literally a sentence in the book. Like, I was let go from my job or something like that. So the thing is twofold. At the time that you're going through the failure, it can seem massive and all encompassing. And there's that saying, life is lived forward but understood backwards. So, you know, but secondly, it was the impetus for me to start my own business. Like, as I said, I was happy being behind the scenes person, the number one, number two, whatever you want to call it. And it wasn't until I really didn't have any other option. Like, I could have found a job. Like, my job, especially in COVID, my old job, has asked me back many a times. But I was like, I've got kids now. I like the flexibility. Anyway, I digress. But I think, you know, what is a barrier or a failure or something in the moment can actually be a stepping stone or a milestone on the path to your goal. And I loved how you talked about reframing, you know, it's a lesson or taking the learning, because we can take some hits.
Absolutely. And something just you reminded me in what you shared there, I said it didn't really affect me as such, like once I'd finished that honors battle and finally got the graduation and but you know what? I graduated from that, or completed it, in mid 2002, and I couldn't get a job anywhere. With 4 years of tertiary education in my city, now I was caring for an elderly family member at that point, so there were limitations on how far I could go. I was in a regional city, but a larger one. Could not get a job, anything to do with science, anything to do with anything I was doing or had done, and no one would give me a needed experience in order to get experience that they wanted for the jobs, you know, all that. And so I can probably look at that and go, actually, it probably did dent my confidence a lot at the time, but at the same time, that opened doors for me too. I ended up going in and doing admin. I was paid minimum wage, literally, to type. And because I can type really fast. By the time you write a thesis, you learn how to type, or you find ways around that. But I had always been able to type quickly. So 100 words per minute, really high accuracy. I was in there in an engineering and architecture firm. And you know what? What has that got to do with science? Absolutely nothing. But do you know how much I learned from that job on office skills, on organizational skills, on what not to tolerate moving forward, because I was treated like crap, a whole lot of stuff. And that then becomes part of my story. Again, looking back years later, so much of what I learned in that job, I've used the skills from that, even though it seems so unrelated to anything else that I would do. But it was, and even just the things that the business manager said to me about pay and that sort of thing, because it was meant to be reviewed after 3 months, and blah, 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 you know, you're not accurate enough. 200-page specification documents, FYI, anyone who's ever looked at a engineering specification, they're tediously, I would make like 3 or 4 typos in that whole thing, and that was not good enough accuracy, even though I was still fairly new to it and whatever else. Anyway, but I learned from that. I learned to
I
pay
love
attention
that.
to the detail, and how much has that changed? So even in your darkest moment, if you can just sit with it, it's good to acknowledge it. Like, you don't want to, I personally don't think pushing it down is a great idea, but acknowledge it. And even if it's crap, acknowledge that and stay in that space for a bit, and then see what else that means is opening up, because it more than likely means that a better option is right there. You just may not have seen it yet.
I love that so much. And two things. Firstly, what not to tolerate. We totally got to do a podcast episode on that. Like, when you're talking about that, I was like, that's an episode.
Yep.
And the second thing is, when you alluded to, like, I did the thesis and then it was about science, like natural science dingoes, and I ended up working in engineering, which is technically still science. But the thing that I wanted to bring attention to is sometimes we can think the thing is a failure. Like, I have a medical science degree with honors. I don't do anything with that now. And a lot of people be like, well, that was a failure. Do you know what I learnt from my degree and from, honors? Is, it's how to type, which is a skill I hadn't even really considered until you said it. And it was funny. I was typing something the other day, and my son Casimir, who's 7, is like, oh my goodness, mummy, you can type fast. So yes, how to research. Yes. Like, if it's available on the internet, I can find it. Like, I'm like the sleuth of things, because and it cracks me up sometimes when people are like, I did my research, and I'm like, what? So you Googled and ended up on the first? Anyway, I digress. How to research. And, and the other, the skill, like the inadvertent skills, how not to settle, how not, like, how what you allow will continue, and, being treated like this, and, have how many page document engineering briefs. I know a lot. My husband is an engineer, and often I will hear him arguing about, why do we need a document that's, hundreds or thousands of pages to do a job that takes this many minutes that nobody reads anyway, and, all this sort of stuff. But,
oh yes, all those things. And I mean, this was done in Microsoft Word. Granted, it's not like it was on a typewriter, thank goodness, but it was pretty rudimentary. But then at the same time, I learned so much about tabulation, or not even, well, some tabulation.
That's why you're an Excel spreadsheet guru, because
I do a lot of all of the Office suite. I learned so much in that job but it also gave me so much clarity on what I wanted. So I went into, of all things, after that, a what do you call it? Property valuer. That was the next year.
I didn't know this.
No,
I'm learning all sorts of things today.
Doesn't come out of the closet too often. And I stuck with that. And then finally, so it was a year and a half, 2 years probably almost after I graduated, I was offered some work at the university to facilitate prac classes and be a tutor type demonstrator assistant and that sort of thing. And so I finally got into the uni system, and then I was like, right, I'm just quitting the full-time job and just going to make do on that, because I didn't want to tolerate being, and there's nothing against admin people. I adore the admin people I have in my life, and I co-facilitate so much of the admin of my business and the other business I look after. But at the time, the way that the admin people were treated in those firms was absolutely abhorrent. I'm like, I don't need to be treated like that. I don't need to be treated special just because I've got a degree, but I need to be treated like a human, and you're not treating anyone like a human. So I decided at that point, I at least had respect given to me, even though I was on the bottom of the pecking order of everything at the uni. I didn't care, because the people were nice and I was respected as a human being. And, I can look at that now as those experiences in those firms. I learned so much, and yet part of it was learning the boundaries on, I don't need to be spoken to like that, and that sort of thing. So
yeah,
it's not really failure as such, but it loops in.
There's so many lessons, because I think there are dreams, goals, desires, however you want to frame it, that we have, and we can often fall into, if this, or when this, then that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we hold ourselves back. And even if we do experience that, it can almost be like fool's gold, because you've achieved the goal, but you don't magically feel, usually it's confident or secure or something like that. And it's like, for me personally, I've never felt security in the achievement of a goal. I've actually felt worse, because then I have more to lose. Whereas when I didn't have it. So I think it's interesting when we're looking at failure, I believe that true success comes from the ruins of past failures, like from the rubble of this thing that didn't work out, or from the, like, I look at my career path, which has been similar to yours. We'll have to do a whole episode on careers and jobs one day, because did you and I ever talk about my stint at teaching? Oh, actually, you've read my book, so you would have seen my stint at teaching. But so many things that we kind of have a go at, and then we could see that as a failure, or we could see that as like, thank goodness, like, uni degrees, they're not small change to invest in. And often people will be like, I've got this really expensive piece of paper, but the skills you learn, regardless if you follow that career path to its logical choice or end up doing something else, it's just incredible. And I think, I imagine a lot of our listeners, because, the Over It podcast, we're over trying to lose weight, or we're over trying to find our dream job, or we're over prioritizing everyone's health ahead of our own. And we can kind of set ourselves up for failure on the failure episode by going into this perfectionistic, like, all or nothing. And if, when the kids are older, or when this, then I will have more time, magically more time. I don't know why we do this. Because the thing is, it's another one. We could do a whole episode on time. So I don't know about you. I'm sure you're the same. Before you have kids, you think that you don't have any time. Mm-hmm. And when you have kids, you're like, oh my goodness, I had so much time. But then imagine when the kids are older. Like, I don't have old enough kids yet, but people, like, when they start going out and driving themselves, you're like worried about that. So, like, it's never the time.
Get in and do what you can. And even if it's a little, like, talking about the degree, that's my undergraduate degree right there. It's such an expensive little piece of paper. I agree. That's only the 3-year one, granted, but only. But what I learned in that time, and the lessons from it are so much more than that. But I don't have that just because I got a degree. I had that because it was my lived experience. And so many of the listeners, I'm sure, even if they don't have a degree, I bet you they're saying, oh, well, this was a failure and that was a failure, and I'm stuck here in a rut of some sort because I failed at blah. What is it that you've learned from that? What is it that you can take away from that, and see if you can acknowledge even the littlest things, and that can help to change your trajectory in general. But even just if you're having a really hard time at the moment, what can you write down? 3 things that actually, come out of that failed situation, or perceived failed situation. That could make such a big difference, to look at that list and go, I did. You've given birth to your child, even if the child has had troubles, or ways to help them now, or you're getting help from people who do, or you're using the skills on typing.
I'm going to up the ante on that, Kristan. I love that. So you said 3. My challenge for any listener is 5 lessons from your failure. And you can either share it, or comment, or tag us, or if you don't want to, because, it might be a bit sensitive, send us, either one of us or both of us, an email, either we've done or what they are. Because the thing is, something shared is something celebrated. And it can be really easy, and I'm the queen of this, listen to a podcast, oh, that was nice, move on. But where you start to get transformation is when you stop and do the exercise. So, and actually, we'll do it live. What's a failure you can think of off the top of your head? Actually, let's do the thesis for both of us, because we've been talking about. So you've got your first one already. You're a really good touch typer. What else?
Which one will I pick?
You got 5 of them, so 4 more.
Oh, yeah. I think the research you touched on.
Oh, yeah, you're going to take one of mine. That's okay. I'll take your typing one, so we'll be even Stevens.
It's the ability to find anything, like you said, but it's also to understand that it's deeper than the surface. Like, to understand something,
that's a third one.
Follow the bunny trail of not just looking at the first thing you find, but understanding how does that connection that can come from true research, not just, well, I found the answer I want. Is it the answer?
Oh, yeah, that's the next level. You can have that as 3. Okay, 2 more.
How to deal with difficult situations in a workplace, or for me, it was a study, but the personalities of the academics,
yes,
were pretty challenging. I had a great supervisor, but he had his own, as we do, we all have our own quirks, but managing, like, all of that was challenging, because it's the whole thing with honours, right? And for those who haven't done it, she learned to be really independent. It's not like undergraduate learning. It's a very
it's totally self-led, and basically the other person gets their name on the thing that they didn't even write. But anyway, I digress. All right, last one, bring it home.
And Whoa. I think that I could choose to not continue down that path. So, Suze, I think you know this, but for the audience, there's a really strong academic background behind me. Both of my parents had PhDs, have had. My dad had one, my mum has two. So, you know, overachiever much. She's a pretty amazing person. But just getting a 2B in a family like that, and my eldest brother had first class honors in like 4-dimensional computer technology. Yeah, really high level. I'm pretty consistent performer and will chip away at things. I don't even begin to understand the level of stuff that he's done. But coming out of that and going, I'm not going to do a PhD just for the sake of doing a PhD because I can't get a job or whatever. I found my own way. And my dad had actually passed away just before I started honors. So it was really challenging for me he knew before he died that I had chosen to go and do it. So that was very, well, gratifying is not the right word, but I was very glad that we had that resolution, because as I was only 19 when I started honors, I was young to graduate uni. And so I think it was just turned 20 when I started, but the decision was made at 19. And so, yeah, it was definitely,
that's awesome.
Could I have been letting down my dad and my mum by not doing it? But I still chose to not do it.
I love it. Alrighty, my turn. 5. Here we go. Number 1 is the research. If it's on the internet, I will find it. Number 2, I'll piggyback off your touch typing skills. Next level. Beforehand, they were okay. Now they're sensational. And it's something that you take for granted. And this with anything, as you learn something and then you master it, you kind of take it for granted. And it's not till someone brings attention to it or you see someone who struggles with it, you go, oh, wow, this is in my wheelhouse now. Number 3, I don't think I've shared this with anyone, so it'll be fascinating, but for me, it's an achievement. So basically, I struggled to get my driver's license. Not that I failed the test a number of times. Speaking about failure, I didn't even want to sit it because of failure. But driving has always made me nervous and anxious. So anyway, when I was doing my thesis, as you said, it's not like uni where you're taught, it's completely self-led. I had to visit these people in their homes. And some of them lived in locations that weren't accessible public transport. So I had to get my license. So my thesis was the impetus for me at 21 to get my driver's license. Number 4, it was basically the skill of approaching people, because also this was completely my project. I had to approach them and ask them and enroll them, which was really hard for me. I'm introvert, I'm socially awkward, and I'm approaching people who are in hospital and sick. Hey, can I visit you when you go home? It's not really that enticing, but then again, actually it ended up being very interesting because elderly people, so they were lovely, and that connection part of it ended up being something else. And number 5, I think it's like with all the thing about 2A or first class and the self-righteous part of me was like, I deserve this. Advocating for myself, yes, but also realizing, would you rather be right or happy? I didn't want to wait 6 more months to graduate. I knew I wasn't going to go down this path. I had left my Bachelor of Medicine and Bachelor of Surgery by then, was being a personal trainer. I was like, does this really matter? And I think that's a real big life lesson in the scheme of things. We can want to be so right because we are, and that self-righteousness, to let go of that, to be like, small potatoes now. I still have the HNS next to my name. I've still got the letters. So
that's never going to change. They're never going anywhere, are they?
A really big life lesson, because sometimes we can stick to something. Like I was having a conversation with my dad recently. Love you, Dad. I don't know if you can listen to my podcast, but it was so funny because he was determined that I didn't understand. And I was like, I understand, Dad. I just don't agree. And we were having this back and forth. So in the end, I let him explain it for the umpteenth time and, like pretended, oh, yeah, that's great. Because once again, it's like, do I want to be happy or do I want to be right? So, but I find it interesting sometimes. It's knowing when I'm so passionate behind something, I'm unflappable. But other times it's like, in the scheme of things, is this big of a deal? And the thesis thing really wasn't. So when to let things go.
Big lessons there. I look forward to the comments. I think this will be so interesting to see. So again, if you're comfortable with sharing your comments, great. Otherwise, email us, even just to say that you've done them. Will be really nice to hear that we've given people the inspiration to give something a go, because it doesn't have to be that you've had honors and that you've learned something from that. Don't feel
it
you have
could
to live
be
up to that.
anything. It could be
Literally.
gardening, says the person. Is it the black thumb or the brown thumb? The person who kills everything. Speaking to the person with the most luscious garden and your own peas. Those of you watching the
Even
video.
have one here.
Here's one I prepared earlier. And sometimes for everyone, she sends me pictures of kale, knowing how much I hate kale. But like, it could be a garden. It could be a parenting moment. It could be I don't know, painting your fence. I think sometimes this is another thing, we downplay our successes because on the scheme of things, is that such a big deal? And I still love, and if I find it, I'll put it in the show notes, that Neil Gaiman, Neil Armstrong quote. Do you know the one I'm referring to? About imposter syndrome?
Yeah.
So we can be like, oh, I haven't achieved that much. And it's like, if the dude who first walked on the moon thinks he hasn't achieved anything, what hope do the rest of us have? And so to us, the thing that we've done, it seems so normal. Like, oh yeah, I got a thesis. And to other people, be like, oh my goodness, nobody in my family's been to uni. So that's a huge thing. Actually, I was only the second person in my family to get a uni degree. So that's a whole other thing. Not, you know, but it's like, what is commonplace to you, to someone else is inspirational. And the lesson that you have got from your failure, that could be enough. So my hope for this episode, if nothing else, somebody's listening to this and has thought of a lesson from a failure that they'd never even considered before. Maybe you too are a fast touch typer or a really good researcher. Well, this has been fabulous. Any last words of wisdom before we wrap up, Kristan?
No, I think we've covered so much, and yeah, it's been really fun.
It has been fabulous. So once again, if you have enjoyed this episode, please write us a review or share it with a friend, tag a friend or forward it to them. Yeah, thank you so much for listening. We'll see you on the next one. Bye.